Amy, are you ready?
Yep, we should be live.
Okay, great. Thank you, Chris. Good afternoon and welcome everyone to our policy meeting. Today is Tuesday, October 13th. I want to welcome everyone, remind everyone that our brand new and official administrative liaison for the policy committee is now Mr. George Regal. Hi, George. Welcome.
Thank you.
Committee. Welcome, Mr. Diazio, our solicitor, our teacher representative, Mrs. McMenamin. I want to welcome Dr. Scott Hand, our director of technology, who's participating in today's meeting. Say hello to Mr. Batchelor. Welcome my fellow policy committee members, Susan Stern, Liz Duffy, and Jeff Jubileer. Unfortunately, our student representative is busy competing in a soccer game, and so she will not be able to make it today, but she sends her regards, and she looks forward to a recap after the meeting. So with that said, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Regal. Do you have any administrative remarks for us this afternoon?
I prepared a speech for everyone. So now I just have a few. Yeah, thanks, Amy. So I am excited to join the policy committee. I know Anthony's quite upset that he no longer has the job. So we will continue to work with him behind the scenes. He wears many hats and he's been a big help transitioning. And he did neglect last month to wish himself a happy birthday. So he spent the policy committee night with us on his birthday, September 15th. So belated happy birthday to him.
Sorry, George, that's my birthday too. So you just taught me something. I did spend it with you. I just sorry to interrupt.
Well, belated birthday to you as well.
Dr. Stevenson and I share more in common than I realized. So thank you for that.
Yeah. I'll have to get everyone's birthday and make sure we keep up with his tradition. So yeah, we do have two policies up tonight for a second read, 103 and 248, and their corresponding ARs. We do have a few first reads for two policies, I believe, and they are still related to Title IX. This should wrap up our Title IX changes with the numerous policies that had to be changed due to that the new regulations, and Ed will get into that in a second. And we also have Scott with us tonight. There is one, Dr. Hand, one policy for technology, 829, I believe. There is another corresponding policy that should come to us next month. So we will probably welcome him back in November as well. And that's it, Amy. We'll pass it back to you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Mr. Regal. Good job. I'd like to move into public comment. I don't know who's monitoring that tonight, but do we have any?
I don't think there is any as of now. I'll check for the end of the meeting as well.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Mr. Batchelor. Next is our approval of minutes. Does anybody on the committee have any questions or concerns about the minutes from last month's meeting? Nope. Okay. Then we'll move right into our first agenda item, which is 4.1, Policy 103. It's titled Non-Discrimination in School and Classroom Practices. And for anybody who's following along, it might be a little bit confused. The actual corresponding document has a different title as we decided during the first read of this policy. So I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Regal, to lead us through this agenda item.
All right. So yes, the policy 103 is the committee decided last month to change this title to will be, if passed by the board for a second read. The new title will be Equal Opportunity and Non-Discrimination Affecting Students. So that was discussed. I think actually Avery brought it up last month, and Ed described how that would work, with that policy name change. And this is, as you'll see in the remarks, this is one of the policies that was changed due to Title IX regulations. Ed, do you want to add anything to that?
I don't have any updates since last month. Is the only question I have is whether the administrative regulation is being presented as well.
It is, yes. So 103, AR 103, which accompanies the policy, is on tonight's agenda just as a presentation item. The AR 103 was expanded again due to the regulation changes, and Ed did speak on it last month that will come to us. It's an expanded version of what the AR for 103 was, and it incorporates the new requirements for reporting and the process in looking at those reports if any accusations are made for equal opportunity non-discrimination. So, and that is again related to students. There is one on the agenda we'll get into in a little bit related to staff and hiring practices.
As best I recall, George, the AR was not presented when we did our first read of the policy. So the AR is
Correct.
something that everybody's seeing for the first time this month, even though it doesn't require board approval. It's an additional document that the group did not see on the first read in September. So with that, if neither you nor Ed have anything else to add, we'll make our rounds of the committee and see if anybody has any lingering questions on the policy after its first reading in September, or any questions about the AR, even though we're not approving them, but sometimes you have a question when the document's attached, and make sure to touch on that too. So let's start just going in sort of a random order who I see on my screen first, and I see Jeff. So Jeff, do you have any questions about 103 policy or AR?
So I'm not punting, but I took notes, but there's a lot of related policies tonight that I'm just trying to wrap my head around still. So I'm going to pause for a moment, if you don't mind going to maybe some of the other members. And I'm
I
just
can
going
come
to
back
review
to you
my
if you
notes,
want.
if that's okay, and
Yep.
they come back to me. Thank you.
Okay. Well, actually, Mrs. McMenamin, do you have any questions or concerns about anything for 103?
No, I think I was good from last time.
Okay. Liz, do you?
Mine relates more to the AR. My understanding is that the AR is for the reporting mechanism and how we go about that. And it just seemed to me, I just had a question that then it's a pretty jam-packed AR, because then we get into all the, am I going to say it right? Guidelines. And it seems, I have a question. Do we consider doing this in two different ARs?
Yeah,
Because it seems like it seems pretty buried to me if I'm thinking that the initial AR is for the reporting mechanism.
Yeah, I'll start, and Ed, you can chime in. So we tossed back and forth whether we would expand AR 103 or make a new AR 103.1. I think it was tossed around, and that would include, Liz, just the new process as it related to the Title IX. We ultimately concluded that we would do one AR and just have an expanded version of it. So definitely get the point that it may seem buried, but it did seem to flow just as well in that expanded version. Ed, do you want to add anything to that?
I don't have anything beyond that, other than just to point out to the committee that starting on page 2 of the regulation, the gender expansive and transgender student section of the AR, everything from that point down, we did not touch at all. All of that language remains unchanged. Mrs. Duffy, to your point, certainly that language could all be put in a separate administrative regulation. There's no right or wrong way to do it. Different school districts do it differently. Some maintain 2 ARs, some maintain 1. But just to be clear, in terms of what's changed for purposes of this meeting, it's the first page, and then that first 2/3 of the second page up until the gender expansive and transgender section.
Okay.
Liz, do you have anything else?
And then just a comment on the agenda item. This is just more procedural, but we refer to the subject of the policy in the old title, and I'm wondering if we could just note that, that we also, that we renamed it just to follow, because I think it was a little confusing in the packet to follow all the policies and the renaming. If we could do that on the agenda, if we could just note that in the future.
Sure. Yep.
Sure.
We will try to do that. Yep.
Anything else, Liz?
That's it. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, Amy, I
Yeah.
was just going to say, my understanding from last month, this month, the change is really in the Title IX update. All else is the same.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure. Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
And more specifically, I think What the change has been is in the reporting procedures. There's a whole lot more to the policy besides just the reporting procedures, but that's what changed at the federal level and had implications for policy for school districts. Does that help, Jeff?
Yeah, it definitely does. And I agree with Liz is as a new, still in my first year, and Liz and I in our first year, this was we had the policy, but this is the first time we dug deep into it because it was in our agenda. Although we weren't, that was no different. So thank you. It's very meaty, MEATY, and very important. And so I think that's where the careful consideration comes into because of all that I learned just from reviewing that policy. Thank you.
Well, to that end, and I don't remember what September's agenda looked like, but I think again, the purpose of the little description at the bottom of the agenda item, we've gotten into the practice of pointing out what the bulk of the change is to help all board members, but particularly new board members on this committee, know how to zoom in on what it is they're supposed to be reviewing. So may I request that when you write this description, you include the fact that the title has changed, or especially as it's coming around a second time after the first read it had been proposed to be changed, and also that it has to do with the reporting procedures. Is there some way to help? It just helps focus on what part of the documents board members should look at.
Yeah, we can definitely add that in the description, the little paragraph, like you pointed out. That's not a problem at all. I think in terms of the title, until it's passed, for a second read, it wouldn't officially be updated on board docs and posted for public. But yeah, we can certainly add a note. I'll make sure I just made a note for myself to do that if this happens again, with other policies. That's no
Thanks. It
problem.
doesn't have to be like a 2-paragraph description, but just something that says you may want to look at this particular part of the policy. That's where the essence of the changes are.
Not a problem. Yep.
Okay,
Thank
great.
you.
Thanks. Susan, do you have anything you want to talk about with 103?
Yeah, a couple of quick things. One, just correct me if I'm wrong, but we don't technically change the title of the policy until it reaches second approval process, which is the reason we're still titling it on the agenda with the old title, because technically until we do the second read and final approval, that's when the title will change, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay, and then to Liz's idea or thought about maybe breaking out the AR, and we did have this conversation last month. Do we need to have, if you were to break it out to a second AR or a subset AR, 103.1, do you need a separate policy? Do you need to break that portion of 103 out into 103.1 to support having a 103.1 AR, or can you have policy 103 and then within the policy reference, that administrative regulations and 103.1 can still be under 103?
Yes, you absolutely can have multiple ARs under one policy.
Do you understand my question?
Yeah, he got it. Your audio's a little wonky, but he got it, I think.
Sorry, we can have 2 ARs under one policy, Ed, or do we have to have one policy and one AR?
Now you can have multiple policies under, or multiple regulations under one policy.
Okay, well, I mean, I guess then, and since we don't really get involved with ARs, once we get the second read of policy 103 done, I guess administratively, hearing Liz's feedback administratively, if you all feel it's worthwhile to break basically the 2 main ideas into 2 different ARs, administratively, if you decide to do that, that's, at this point, I had raised, question about that earlier, but at this point, since we're set to do a second read of 103, if administratively you feel like that would make things easier, I would defer to you on that.
Great.
Okay, anything else, Susan? Okay. I think everything that's been raised, I would have asked to, including, I assume, when we approve this policy, that the cross-reference will be updated to refer to policy 248 by its correct name when that becomes the right name. the word unlawful gets taken off of that. And also to Liz's point, I do feel the content of GET is really important. And again, it's not for board members to approve ARs, but I think that material gets lost in 103, and for the audience isn't just the administration and staff, it's also our community who might want to access a policy. And personally, I feel that information for people who may want to see it, it's really hard to find. So I know, and in fact, I know that there are some school districts you represent, Mr. Diazio, who actually have that as a separate and distinct policy. Upper Dublin and Cheltenham, for example. But since we're not going that route, I would ask you to consider, for the sake of the community, perhaps having it broken out separately so it's easier to find.
I think that's a good point, and George and I can regroup after the second and final reading, and we can certainly do that. It should not be a problem. It's very easy to do in board docs.
Okay, great. And then, of course, this is just a little thing, but attachment C still uses the term guidance counselor, and we are moving away, I think, as a district from that term into school counselor. So I just wanted to put that in there as an FYI for anybody who's interested in keeping up with, I think, the evolution of that term in the Radnor Township School District. All right. And that's all I have to say about 103. And it looks like, Jeff, did we circle? I wanted to make sure we circled back to you because I know you had wanted to wait until everybody else.
No, I interjected when I thought it was appropriate to get my one, and the other questions all around pretty much, except Ms. Stearns, which I'm learning from, making policies and good practices, et cetera. So no, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. You just interject when you need to.
I don't want to interrupt though.
No, it's all good. I'm glad what you needed was addressed. Okay, super. So with that, we will move into the next agenda on our next policy on our agenda, which is 4.2 policy 248, which is currently titled Unlawful Harassment. And I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Regal.
Yeah, so again, same as similar to 103. This was a change required or due to the Title IX changes. And yes, it is the new title, if passed, will be harassment. Unlawful will be taken out of there. So this is up for a second read. Ed, do you want to add anything about this policy from last month's discussion?
There's nothing new from last month.
Okay, great. Thank you both very much. And we'll start off with you, Mrs. McMenamin. Do you have anything that you want to comment on as this comes before you for a second time?
Nope, I'm good with this one.
Okay, terrific. And you know what? I failed to formally say that 103 will be going for its second read at the end of the month. So just for the sake of the record, our previous agenda item is moving forward for its second read and adoption and at the end of October. All right, Jeff, coming to you again first. You have anything?
No, I'm good based on last month and the change that Ed described to Title IX. So I'm good.
Okay, terrific. Liz?
Just two quick things. I don't know if we covered this last month. I can't remember, but why wouldn't we also say here affecting students? Because this is it relates to students, correct? This policy?
Yes, this would be the policy when a student complains about harassment. So it could be student on student harassment. It could also be if a staff member is harassing a student, the student would report the conduct in accordance with this policy. So it's any time that a student is feeling harassed, just like bullying, just like hazing.
Wait, Ed, but that sort of contradicts the second statement in the purpose that says that it's limited to harassment of students by other students. What you just said, I think could potentially lead to some confusion. It does say in the sentence after that allegations of harassment by or of employees or other adults are covered by other applicable board policies, but it very specifically said that this is limited to harassment of students by other students.
Yes,
So the
I'm
student being
seeing,
harassed by somebody else,
yes,
that's
okay,
a separate issue.
so what we'll do is, and that's a good point. I'm glad that that was raised, because one of the items that we'll look at in a moment is the 348 policy, and we will need to add to that policy that it's harassment not only of employees, but it's by and of employees. So because the way that the draft was presented for 348, as we'll see in a minute, it was only applying to harassment of district employees. So the way to close that gap is to make the 300 series policy by and of district employees, and then it's correct. Then all the bases are covered.
By, of, and among, I might say. I have
Sure.
that in my notes when we're coming to 348, but thank you for saying that.
Yep,
So
yep.
does Liz, does what Mr.
Yeah,
Dion just said help you?
Yes, but I guess my question is, just like we changed the title in the previous policy to say affecting students, would we want to clarify that this harassment policy is for students? I don't know.
Well, this one's in the 200 section, so it's implied. The other one was in the 100 section.
Okay.
I don't want to speak for you, Mr. Diazio, but
Okay.
Yeah,
And
that-
anything in the 200 section is about students.
Okay.
Yep.
And then my second would just why wouldn't it says in the purpose when we say by other applicable board policies, I thought in some other policies we actually cited the other ones for reference.
Yes, and if you look at the bottom of the policy, 103, 247.
And that,
Oh, so looking at the bottom of policy.
cross-reference, I see it, yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
and that 248 is supposed to be, I'm going to change that right now. It's supposed to be 348.
Okay.
That was the wrong reference there. So I've just updated that. So the cross references should be 103, 247, 249, and 348. You don't need a cross reference to 248 in policy 248. That was just a typo there, but that's a good catch.
Okay.
That's it? Okay. Susan?
Yeah, so actually, this is a good segue to that. So Ed, those cross-reference policies, my note on this policy is, what if a student is being harassed by someone who's not a district employee? But on school grounds. So is there protection against an adult who's not an employee covered under policy 103? Because they have a right to not, but yeah. Is that where their protection comes from? So 248 is about students.
Correct.
I hear you saying that if an employee is harassing a student, among other things covered under 348, it will cover if an employee is harassing a student. But what if we have a student on school grounds being harassed by someone who's not an employee? They have protection, but if I read 248, it says other forms of or other adults are covered by, harassment by employees or other adults are covered by other applicable board policies. If it's another adult, that's covered under 103.
It could be under 103. That's a natural place to put it. The other place where it also could go would be under 906, which is the formal complaints policy. Anytime any individual feels that they're being subjected to any type of wrongdoing, that 906 formal complaints policy is sort of a catch-all. So it could go in either of those places.
Okay, so should 906 also be cross-referenced at the end of 248?
It's a good idea. Yep.
Okay. That Amy, that's all I had about this policy.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Susan. Continuing along with this theme, Mr. Diazio,
Yep.
that second sentence in the purpose, this policy is limited to harassment of students by other students. Allegations of harassment of students. I was thinking it might clarify if this is a student policy and they're being harassed by someone other than a student. Doesn't it make sense to add in allegations of harassment of students by or of employees or other adults are covered by other applicable board policies? Because that is in essence what the sentence means. And I don't think it as clear without that of students in there. I hope that's not a substantive change. I didn't catch it last month,
No, it's not.
but it's clearer that this is specific to issues that students are having by putting in that of students, I think.
All right, so I was just taking a moment to add the cross-reference that Mrs. Stern had suggested. So Amy, just the second sentence of the purpose, this policy is limited to harassment of students by other students. And then can you just repeat your suggestion?
Allegations of harassment of students by or of by employees or other adults are covered by other applicable board policies. Unless I'm getting the essence of that wrong, it seems like this is to help students know what to do if they feel they're being harassed. And the first sentence covers when they're being harassed, they feel they're being harassed by fellow students. And the second sentence tells them, sort of directs them what to do, says it will tell them what to do if it's by others, not students.
Yes, that's correct. I agree with your revisions. That was the intention of the statement. So I have fixed that, and I think that reads much better now. So allegations of harassment of students by employees or other adults are covered by other applicable board policies.
Great. Okay. And then they can go to the cross-reference section and see exactly where they should look if that's the situation for them.
Correct.
Okay.
Exactly
All right.
right.
Is everybody on the committee okay with that? I don't want to make a unilateral change, but I thought that was a necessary one. Okay. Thanks very much for that. And I think then that we can officially move that along to a second read for the October business meeting. And we'll move on to agenda item 4.3. This is a first read, policy 104, non-discrimination in employment and contract practices. You want to tee it up for us, Mr. Regal?
Yes, so this will be a similar conversation, and I do, like I said, we'll make a note to note the changes to the policy name as well if it is being recommended as a change. So this one is being recommended as a change, the current policy 104. Again, it's a title related to Title IX, but the current title is non-discrimination in employment and contract practices. The title will be equal opportunity and non-discrimination in employment and contract practices. So back to something Liz said a little earlier, it was discussed last month when Avery, I believe, brought up the affecting students name change. It was tossed around, and Ed can chime in too here, possibly changing this to affecting employees. However, Ed can describe this better than I can. It does not apply just to employees. With Title IX regulations, this also applies to those seeking employment and also contracted practices that the district has. So it is a Title IX, a change due to Title IX, and there's an AR that's also attached. But just to throw that out there, I know it was discussed last month, and we are now recommending, and you can chime in, that title be changed because it wouldn't capture all of what the Title IX regulations are requiring of us to change. Ed?
Correct. Yeah, I think that's a great summary. Just very simply, an example, if you have an individual who applies for a job with the district and they're not the successful candidate, and they choose to file a complaint alleging that they were not hired for a discriminatory reason, the procedures that are outlined in 104 are the procedures that would guide that investigation internally. So that's why it's not just affecting employees. It could be somebody that was not actually hired and is alleging that they were not hired for a discriminatory reason. So there's just a slight nuance there, but for that reason, I thought that not changing the title made sense.
But it does also cover discrimination of existing employees. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. Do either of you have any more narrative to add before I go around the committee?
No, nothing else from
Okay.
me.
So let's see if there's some feedback on it. Mrs. McMenamin, and as an employee, do you have any questions or comments?
I might, but for right now, I'm good.
Okay, well, you want me to circle back to you because after first read, your commentary next month would need to be non-substantive to not take it off track. So do you want me to circle back to you?
Yeah, at the end.
Okay, all right. Jeff?
Yeah, Ed, does this, I think you alluded to it. This also would apply to third-party vendors, correct?
Yes.
Contracts. I think that's how I interpreted it. It's all the above. I mean, paras, support, contract, 1099s, kitchen sink, right?
All of that would have fall under the big umbrella of employment practices.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay. That's all I have for now.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. Liz? That's a no, you're good? Okay, Susan?
I'm good.
Okay. Mrs. McMenamin, would you like to go now, or do you want me to make a comment or two and then come back to you?
No, I'm actually good. I just wanted to reread one section to double check, but I'm good.
Okay. All right, so I had just had two quick questions. You spoke a little bit to it, Mr. Diazio, with clarifying that this isn't just about the hiring process. It's also about discrimination, non-discrimination in the employee ranks. So my question was, do you feel that employment practices I think you answered this, but is a sufficient catch-all? Because I actually, in my mind, toyed with the idea of, because I know other districts have used the word affecting staff, equal opportunity and non-discrimination in employment practices and affecting staff.
That there's nothing wrong with that title. That would certainly be there's no legal concerns with that title. If that's the, if that's where everybody wants to go, that's fine. I don't have any concerns with that.
To me, it just sort of complemented 103, but also made sure that employment practices were addressed. So, I'm interested to know if the committee would be open to including that, since there's no objection from a legal perspective.
I think it's a good addition, personally.
Okay, thanks, Liz. Jeff or Mrs. McMenamin or Susan?
Fine. I'm fine.
Susan, Mrs. McMenamin, either one, feel free to jump in.
I'm good.
Susan, you're muted. You're still muted.
Honestly, I think it's a little wordy, but it's not enough to have me say, no, don't do it. So I thought employment practices was clean. I thought it was actually, yeah, so, but it's fine. And, it matters more if it doesn't bother Andrea. She's the one impacted by it. It's her policy. If it doesn't bother her, it's fine.
So Mrs. McMenamin, you're okay with this change since you're the employee on the committee?
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
Okay. And the only other question I had, and I had brought this up in our planning meeting, is, and I haven't heard back, so because I know that time was an issue, but for the purpose in 103, again, just for parallel purposes, there was a little bit more expansive writing about the purpose in 103 than there is in 104. And I was wondering if that's by design or that was just something that was left off. There's more of a sort of a thematic statement about why non-discrimination is so important in the purpose of 103, and it's not in 104. It's not a make or break, but I just wanted to ask that question.
I'm looking at this quickly now and comparing it to 103. I don't think that was that wasn't a deliberate decision there. So if there's language that the committee prefers from one policy versus another, that's fine.
Well, I'm not saying that there's any particular language I prefer, except for the fact that 103 had a statement about how our district does not stand for discrimination. And I thought, we do that when it comes to students, and we offer the same stance when it comes to our employees. So I just thought it made sense to put it in both places. Obviously, there might need to be a little bit of wordsmithing, but the statement, the position, I think, makes sense to have in both policies unless anybody disagrees.
Again, I tend to be less is more. I would have actually, in comparing them, I would have said I would have preferred that 103 be shorter. But, I think that's more stylistically wanting policies to be, to have brevity wherever they can. But it's, that and the fact, the only thing I'm thinking about is, are there specific laws, employment laws, that may even supersede our district's perspective on non-discrimination as it relates to employment practices? And I just don't know. And this, to me, seems sufficiently general to make sure that we don't inadvertently say something that could have an implication as it relates to employment law. And maybe employment law is complete enough that it's not an issue.
Yeah, I think my response there would be either way is fine. Again, to your point, it's a stylistic preference. I would say that more school districts are tending to go in the direction of less. I once recently had a board member in another district tell me he would give me a nickel for every word that I took out of the policy, and between the first reading and the second reading. So I think the trend is to go shorter, but that's not everywhere by any means. And some districts do like more of the intro language. So it's really more of a preference. We could certainly take the second sentence in the purpose of 103 and incorporate similar language into 104. At the same time, that won't change the substance of 104 at all, but it would be more, again, stylistic, to your point. Either way is
clear, we're talking about, for anybody who's tracking this, we're talking about one sentence, which would be significantly shorter based on what the sentence is in 103. But it would just, Mr. Batchelor, you've got something to say.
Just going to offer Ed a dime. So I'm going to up it. I like the
I'm offering a quarter. So
Do we have a policy against bribery?
You do.
Yeah.
yeah.
I bet bribery. This is fundraising. This is fundraising. This is
All right. So look, it's a first read. Maybe come back. Would you be okay? Everybody be okay with you coming back with one short sentence to mirror 103? And if the committee doesn't like it, we can take it out. It's a non-substantive change any way you think about it.
When Ed and I meet this month, we can look at that and discuss it. And if there's a recommended change, we'll bring it back.
Okay.
Is that good, Ed?
That's fine. Yep. No problem.
Okay, great. With that, does anybody have any final comments before I say officially that 104 will be up for a first read at the end of October?
Let me just say this, now that I don't print policies, so brevity has an advantage when it comes to fewer pages, but everything's PDF for me.
Okay. All right, so let's move this along for a first read at the end of October, and then we come up to the next item on our agenda, 4.4, Policy 348, currently referred to as unlawful harassment, but subject to change. Mr. Regal.
Yeah, I was just thinking, good thing we took one of the policies off this agenda tonight, because there is probably discussion, and Ed can explain this again more, but I'll start. So policy 348, and then you'll see the other two agendas for repeal, 448 and 548. The policy, again, as it relates to Title IX, needed to be updated. There were some minor changes in the policy 348, which, as Amy pointed out, will be harassment instead of unlawful harassment. But with that said, Ed, and he'll describe in a second, the policy, the corresponding policies that were applicable to other employees, other subsets of employees, has now been collapsed or combined into policy 348, which is why the subsequent policies are up for repeal. So the language now applies to all employees that are covered under the district, which again is why those other two policies would then be up for repeal. So when you read it, it captures some of that language and some of those members who were not in the original 348 policy. And now it's one combined policy. Ed?
Yes, and this will be, I agree with what George said, and for the, to kind of preview what's to come, as we move forward with reviewing the 300, 400, and 500 series policies in the future, the goal would be to move everything, the framework that PSBA is recommending and that most school districts are moving to is just to have one section of your policy manual that relates to employees. Many policies, whether it's the smoking policy, the weapons policy, the harassment policy, the guidelines are the same regardless of what type of employee you are. So it doesn't really make a lot of sense to maintain 3 separate policies. So in the meantime, instead of, so that we don't have to review every HR policy at one time, we'll just do it gradually. And as we move forward with HR policies, we'll revise the 300 level policy, repeal the 400 and 500 level policy, and we will move the revised 300 policy into a separate heading in board docs so that it doesn't fall under the administrative employees tab. There will be 2 tabs titled 300. One will be titled employees. Those will be all the new policies. And then one tab will still be titled 300 administrative employees. And then gradually over time, once all of the 300, 400, and 500 series policies are reviewed and updated, they'll eventually, the administrative employee, professional employee, and support employee sections will go away. And you'll just be left with one section 300 titled employees. I know that was a lot, so I'm happy to take any questions on that.
No, I mean, at last count, I think we discussed this as possibly a PSBA service initiative a couple years ago. We had something like 270 some policies on the books, and this would really help in the interest of brevity, as Susan said, and efficiency, as probably somebody else said. It helps to consolidate where you can. And so a lot of districts are moving towards having one section for all classifications of employees. And that's where you're taking us, it sounds like, Mr. Diazio. And before we go around to the committee, I know you've already said that you were going to make some changes based on some of the feedback you were hearing. Would you like to offer that up now, or do you want us to all weigh in and then you'll summarize it at the end?
I think the second approach is best, but just generally what I'll say is what we'll need to do with this policy is add a note in here that allegations of harassment by employees against students falls under this policy. That's what we need to incorporate.
Okay. Great. So we will stand by and we will now go around and see if, starting with Mrs. McMenamin, do you have any feedback on this policy you wanted to offer?
No, I'm okay with it. I appreciate the consolidation of the two. They were pretty similar, so I like the fact that we're condensing.
Okay, great. Thank you. Jeff?
Sorry, Mr. Diazio, could you just repeat? You just said something. I just want to. You said harassment, alleged harassment of employees by students would also fall into this policy. Is that what you said?
No, but that's
sorry.
You had
sorry.
the other way around, but that's interesting.
What did you say? I'm sorry, I'm losing my mind.
Harassment.
That though, for any employees who are being harassed by students.
Sorry. Well, that's in here, not this one. I'm saying that's, well, whatever. Go ahead. What did you just? I'm sorry. Could you just repeat?
Sure. What we need to include is a statement that says that if a staff member is harassing a student, this is the policy that applies.
Okay. Staff member, yeah, reverse, right. Just to kind of confirm, because I think you explained it well, this is like 104. Every employment, kitchen sink, vendors, contractors.
Yeah.
Or no?
So this policy falls under, this is different in that it falls under in the employee section, but if an outside party was being harassed, whether it be a contractor or a volunteer, that would then fall, the appropriate place to handle that from a practical standpoint would be the formal complaints policy.
906.
Okay, Can I interject here only because we're on this train of thought? Ed, I'm not sure that it makes sense to include harassment of students by employees in this policy. The more I read it, and the reason I say that is two reasons, Jeff, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's
No, I have to,
it's
I
the train of
agree.
thought that I'm on here. This policy actually says that it is only and all about harassment of employees. There's actually not, if you read it carefully, there's actually not a prohibition in here of employees to harass. If you read it carefully, I don't see where it says employees are prohibited from harassing. And so it's an odd policy to then say harassment by employees towards students is covered here.
What about the third sentence under purpose, Susan?
Let me read it because I'm reading the guidelines.
Yeah, go to the third thing.
Yeah. Hold on a second. No, that says all forms of harassment are strictly prohibited of employees, of district employees. That doesn't say by district employees or of and by. So if a teacher is harassing a student, it's not actually prohibited in here because this
Well-
says harassment of employees, not by employees. And and the more I think about it, I don't know why. I think the sentence I asked you guys before in policy 248, which said students being harassed by adults or other people are covered by these other policies. I don't know why that doesn't cover district employees. It's either going to be covered under 906 formal complaint or 103 rather, because they're being discriminated against or bothered or whatever. Yeah, so, and I don't see the prohibition in here or the regulation that covers contracted employees who might harass our employees. See, nowhere in here does it say harassment by or of employees is prohibited. It says of employees, but not by employees. So, yeah, anyway, that's.
Right. So I guess then it's not just a question of what happens when a staff member is harassing a student. It's when a staff member is harassing anybody else, a
Correct.
student, a volunteer.
Yeah.
So that's what will need to change with 348. And what I would propose is that before this goes for a first reading, I'll work with George to make some tweaks and send it to the group for review before it goes to first reading. But what we need to do is incorporate the catch-all for harassment by employees.
Yeah, Jeff, I'm sorry that I interrupted you again, but did you hear, and when I heard you asking about contractors, it was stimulating the same.
Yeah, no, it sort of expanded the sort of line, and I'm with you, and it's just
Something's missing.
well, no, I think it's and I don't mean to joke, but the PDF versus seeing it in paper is causing some. I apologize too, some not confusion, but just having to go back and forth. No, I'm glad you interjected there.
Somebody might want a paper packet going
Sorry.
forward.
We
Trying to help
can
you.
certainly print you a packet.
I'm sorry. Tonight there's a lot of harassment, discrimination, and like there's a lot of stuff going on.
I'm telling you, it's a little, Susan, I give you a lot of credit.
Yeah,
for being able to read
I
that
have met
stuff
my
online.
match tonight.
It's hard.
Sorry.
You give me credit for what?
Being able to read all, hefty documents online.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I struggled tonight. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, it's hard. All right. So, Jeff, going back.
Sorry, Amy.
No,
It's
be sorry. Are you covered with?
no, it's yes and yes, which my second yes has to do more with Susan's comments and the I look at this as a like arrows pointing to and from, employee to employee, employee to student, student to employee, and just just how we're covered. And that's why we have Ed and the experts and George, and Amy, you and Susan, and to help us shuffle through this and make sure we're being all encompassing.
Yeah.
I'm fine for now, otherwise.
Okay. If you think of anything else, don't be shy. Just let us know. I can't remember. Liz, did you weigh in yet?
I did not, but I agree with the discussion about looking at a more universal definition of harassment, or
In
Yeah.
the purpose,
in the
right?
purpose, who we're talking to, identifying the audiences.
Right. Okay. Anything else, Liz?
No.
Okay. So Susan, was that the sum and substance of your thoughts, or do you have more to add? No.
No, it's just, I think there's a piece missing.
There is.
I'm just not sure. I think it's ready for first read, but I don't know how pressing it is to get, because of the Title IX stuff, to get this to a first read this month. Is there a time frame associated with that?
I would rather get it right than rush it. I think I agree with you. I see the gap, and I'd like to take some time to fill it in. So I would recommend either that George and I make some changes before the board meeting and just send it to the policy committee members as an FYI. And if you don't like the changes, it can always be pulled from the agenda at the board meeting. Recognizing that we're going to have it, for discussion again next month, and further changes can be made. And if you don't like the changes, you can always change it on the back end and send it for a new first reading next month. So I would recommend one of two things. I would either recommend holding it now, or directing George and I to go ahead and make some changes, with the understanding that if you're not 100% happy with them, we can review them next month. And instead of sending it for a second reading next month, we could do a repeat first read and make substantive changes next month. So either approach is fine.
Procedurally, if you get this to us before it actually goes on to the agenda, then we could, even though the committee has said to move it forward, the committee, it could be pulled anyway before we could decide not to put it on the agenda, or because the committee would say go to a first read and we'll look at the new purpose.
Well, it's a little bit, and it's a little bit more than just the purpose. So we're going to do the purpose, and then we also have to clarify. There's a classification of prohibited activity that's not directly addressed, and we need to add that in.
All right. Well, that's pretty substantive. I don't know. I think we should probably hold it. Would anybody have any objection to holding it off till next month? Vice Chair or other committee members? Okay. All right. So let's, it could be really busy between now and whatever for everybody. So let's put it on next month's agenda, if that's okay. May I just give a comment or two before you wrap this up? And my question was, do 248 and 348 cover hate or bias incidents?
Hate or bias? Is that what you said?
Yes, yes.
So
maybe that's not the best term for them, but I think you know what I'm talking about, right?
when you say bias, are you talking about like bias in curriculum materials? Bias?
No, I'm talking about like not hate crimes per se, but whatever the appropriate way to describe that would be.
Sure.
Is that considered harassment? That happens, not infrequently. So unfortunately.
If it's based on a protected class, then yes, it would fall under the harassment policies. And even if it's not, if it doesn't, for some reason, it would fall under other policies such as bullying. But yes, that type of conduct is very frequently falls under the scope of harassment, because generally it's behavior, it's hateful behavior that's based on whether it's somebody's race or somebody's sexual orientation or because of their gender. It's generally triggered by a protected class. So in almost every case, it would be considered harassment.
What if it's your political persuasion? Not to, I'm not trying to be silly, but just based on what our environment is like out there right now.
Sure. So that if it was, technically your political affiliation is not necessarily like a protected class, but if you're engaging in disruptive behavior, you can take action for that. If it's repetitive and it's against a student, it would fall under the bullying policy.
Okay.
So there are other policies that may apply in those contexts.
And just to interject, Ed, at some point our policies, hit a limit and things rise to the level of law enforcement's involved and it supersedes our policies anyway. Correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Or it can be handled under the general discipline policy for disruptive behavior.
Right. But a hate crime would be a totally different, a totally different category anyway.
Right.
Okay.
Right, but in the AR for harassment, it does say that you would notify law enforcement. So that is covered. I mean, that's part of the guidelines is if it rises to a certain level, you would involve law enforcement. So that is already part of 248. And I'm not even saying crime. I'm talking about what would feel like harassment based on something like that. I can see why bullying covers that. So just to be clear, to wrap up some of the earlier comments, this is going to cover when it's rewritten harassment among employees, because in the initial purpose, it says harassment of employees. It would be of, by, and among employees, essentially.
Yes, I just took note of that.
Okay. And then I had these other notes, and just to make sure that they've been covered, what if a parent harasses an employee? What if an employee harasses a parent? What if a student harasses an employee harasses a student? So that will be, all of those scenarios will be covered when this is rewritten in a much clearer way.
Yeah, and some of that is covered by civility as well. That's how some of it has to get enforced, through the civility policy.
Okay, and civility is not cross-referenced on here. So would you want to cross-reference civility?
Yeah, we can do that.
And perhaps even bullying or something, if there are other applicable policies that someone might want to, if it doesn't fall neatly under 248 or
Sure,
348.
Yep, we'll take a look at the cross references too and make
Okay.
sure. And the good thing is this will be coming back for a first read next month. So if there are more comments, we can just.
Great. Thank you. I think it was a really good discussion. Thank you, everybody, for your contributions to that. And we will not move this forward. This will be coming back to our, let's see, November. Oh my goodness, is our next meeting, it's going to be November? Wow, okay. It feels like it was just summer. All right, so that'll be coming back for the November meeting. Moving on then to the next agenda item. Actually, it's 6 o'clock. I'd like to ask, these two next items are for repeal. I think really quickly before we wrap up, we could probably knock these out. I can't imagine that anybody has any concerns about items 4.5 or 4.6. We discussed why they're up for repeal. Does anybody have any objection to that?
The only comment there though is that since 348 is not getting revised,
Okay,
448 and 548 shouldn't be repealed yet.
okay.
Oh, wait, can't we can do a first read repeal and hold off on the second read of repeal until we're ready for second read of 348.
You would have to do a repeat first read the second time because it has to be on the agenda 2 consecutive times.
It has to be 2 consecutives.
Correct. But you can move it forward for first read, but it's probably makes more sense just to hold it.
Okay.
And
Well-
I do think that at the very least, I know that we are pretty much out of time, but the policy for 829 is very short. The AR has more commentary to it, but the committee might be able to get through the policy and at least move the policy forward.
Well, I mean, it is 6 o'clock.
Okay.
I'd like to, if it's okay with everybody else, I think if we could stay on time. And by the way, if 8:15 comes back, Dr. Hand, we could be looking at 829 and 8:15 side by side, which wouldn't necessarily be the worst thing, especially for the new board members for whom those policies are going to be new information. So if it's, unless anybody has a strong objection, I'd like to hold off and wrap up the meeting with the idea that the repeals for 448 and 548 will come back next month, and 829 and 815 we'll look forward to seeing as well. I
Great.
think we can fit that all in November. All right. Does anybody have any objection? Speak now or forever hold your peace. Good. Okay. So then we will go. Mr. Batchelor, was there any public comment? Did you that were any new business? First of all, I didn't. Okay. Any public comment?
Nope, we're good.
Okay. So with that, then I'd like to adjourn the meeting. Thank you all for your comments and participation, and we will see you next month.
Great. Take care.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.
Thank
Bye,
you.
thanks.
Bye-bye.